Welcome, folks, to this week's edition of Tech Sales Advice. I am, of course, your host, Chris White, and this is the LinkedIn Live show for technical sales professionals and technical sales leaders. And as I like to say, folks, these are live conversations. They are, by design, unscripted, unrehearsed, and unpredictable. And I am particularly excited to welcome today's guest. She's actually someone who was recommended to me by two of my kids. And in fact, I reached out to her on LinkedIn and I think she thought I was just playing a joke on her or something. Literally, two of my kids saw some of her posts on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, Dad," and completely independently, by the way, "you should reach out to this person. She seems really smart and would be a good guest." And lo and behold, I took a closer look at some of her work and agreed with my kids. She graciously agreed. Her name is Krysten Conner. She started her career as a teacher, a history teacher, if I'm not mistaken, and she worked in her family business, decided to make the leap into sales, quickly became an enterprise account executive with some companies you may have heard of before, like Salesforce and Tableau. And after achieving great success in the field, she decided to get back to her teaching roots. And now she runs a sales coaching and training business, helping AEs and sales teams achieve success of their own. Krysten, thank you so much for being here. I know you have short time, so we are going to be very on point today. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Oh, thanks for the invite. And I did not think you were playing a joke when you said your kids recommended me, and that was beautiful, because I was like, that was intriguing. I don't hear that often. So well done in leading with that. Great prospecting DM.
Well, and for what it's worth, I haven't had my kids say that to me too often. Just the fact that my kids have any interest in what their dad happens to do, for those of us who have adult kids, is a great thing. So, Krysten, I know you have a reasonably short amount of time, and I do appreciate you being here. We're going to be talking about the do's and don'ts of being an account executive. But before we launch into that, do you mind just telling a little bit more about your story, going from a teacher and helping out with the family business to jumping into sales, and specifically enterprise sales in the software world?
Yeah. Very briefly. I was going to be a teacher and change the world, right? Very idealistic, as young people are. And did that for 3 years. And then the stats are that 50% of teachers burn out after 3 years, which I fell into that camp. And then at the same time, the family business that my father ran, he was like, "Hey," I'd worked in that business as a kid. He was like, "Hey, we need you to come back and help us revamp and modernize some operations." So I did that, thinking, "Oh, well, this is my path now. Now I will eventually take over this family business," and ran it for a couple of years and learned that I did not want to run a family business. And so then it was like, well, now what do I want to be when I grow up? And in my teaching career and then in the business, I was always interested in tech and startups and how can we do it smarter, and I just followed tech and startups recreationally. And having sat in multiple seats in the business, I was like, the sales piece is the piece I enjoy the most. And so then realized that in order for anyone to hire me as a tech salesperson, I would have to connect those dots, right? And I would have to make that story make sense. And so I targeted and then was ultimately hired by a company that sold to K-12 schools, right? I knew their buyer better than they did.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. And then you were obviously with Tableau and Salesforce. Yeah. So, and I love having this conversation with people who have experience as an account executive in software companies that had to work with sales engineers. And obviously, most of my career in sales was on the other side of that equation. Let's jump right into the do's and don'ts. By the way, folks, we don't see you out there. If you do care to say hello, please feel free to do so. If you do have a question for Krysten or myself, please feel free to ask. So let's jump right into it. One of the things you and I were talking offline is one of the sort of the first thing that came to mind when I said, what is it that what's one of the top items in the list in the do category for sales engineers. Do you care to share what you were sharing with me?
Yeah, I think the number one kind of mindset shift that takes a good sales engineer and makes them great, that makes them exceptional, is understanding that they are in sales. I always refer to them as technical sellers because that is what they are. And we were talking offline about I feel like there's a resistance to that many times. And it's because I think sales gets a terrible reputation sometimes, and sometimes that is well earned. In fact, I didn't get into software sales for quite a while because my husband kept telling me, you'd be great in this sale. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't lie to someone. I can't promise that things work when they don't. And he's like, I'm in sales. Do you think that's what I do? And I'm like, oh, fair. And now knowing there are like some of the best, smartest, most humble and helpful people I know are in sales. So I think we have to bust through that myth that sales means that we're sleazy or underhand or that we overpromise. We should absolutely not do that. And I think also because I fell into sales after having done multiple things at the agency I ran, I was the buyer, right? So I knew that like life is long and the world is small and karma is real. And like, even if we don't just want to do the right thing, doing the right thing is the best thing we can do business-wise. So I think part of the mindset shift for technical sellers is understanding that they can be in sales, and because sales at its best is helping. We should be helping people solve a problem. We should be helping make their career better, either getting a promotion or not working 80 hours a week so that they make their kids play, or the soccer game, or the vacation with their parents, or what have you. Like that, understanding that being in sales is actually going to elevate their career is probably the number one thing that I think many technical sellers don't do for a while.
It strikes, in fact, so many chords for me. There's a gentleman named Cliff Barcliff who said hello. He was on this show, actually, Krysten, not too long ago. And he used to say, he said, when I was in the field, I told people I sell weekends, because he sold software that would help with data centers. And you wouldn't have to take that call in the middle of the night on the weekend, right? Sure. So his just like what you're saying. And by the way, I love all the quotable quotes that I get when I have guests like yourself. You just gave me another one. And I want to make sure I get this right. Life is short, the world is small, and karma's real. So selling is all about helping. And I absolutely love that. Now, what are the observable behaviors of those sales engineers who develop the right mindset and understand that, okay, I'm actually in sales and my primary role is not, I think you said earlier, just show how the sausage is made and be the technical expert, but I understand that my role is a sales professional. What are some of the observable behaviors that you think those individuals demonstrate?
Yeah, I would say, I think a mindset shift, a way to think about that is it's the shift of viewing ourselves, instead of we're not technicians, we are translators, right? A technician knows how your car works, right? And can tell you, I need to take apart the engine because of X, Y, and Z. Like a translator helps people understand each other, and the tech and the AE or the AM or whoever on the call should understand the business problems that they're solving, but they may not understand the exact technical ways of how to get there. The SE should be that translator in the middle that understands the technical way to get there, but also the business problem that they're solving. Like good translators are invaluable to both sides because we can't always speak each other's languages, right? Like they're so crucial, but it's a difference. It's a difference in the mindset. So that's a mindset, but you said observable. Observable behaviors are like asking great questions, like asking great follow-up questions, second level questions. Like, okay, you asked to see this feature. We can absolutely show you that. Could you help me understand what you're hoping this will do? Could you help me understand how you currently accomplish this? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Right? Because many times in software, we are not creating something new. We're probably displacing something that they already have, whether that's this wonky workaround or another platform or whatever. Like, what do you like about what you do now? What do you not like about it? Right? Because if they like this feature or this way of doing it, and we have that, we should talk about that. If they don't like this other thing, like, we should be able to speak about how we don't do that or how we avoid that. Right. So they go deeper. They understand this is, I'll never forget wandering into this accidentally at Tableau and being like, oh crap, never again. Somebody asked, can everyone in the company like see this dashboard? And Tableau was built around like data democracy, data to the people. We literally had that on t-shirts, right? But we were selling to like banking and insurance companies, people that are very locked down. They are all about risk and avoiding risk and all this stuff. And we're like, and the SE was like immediately like, absolutely, everyone can access this. And then people were like, that's a hard stop for us. We actually don't want people to be able to see this.
Yeah. And that's when your heart just sinks into your stomach.
Yeah. Right. And like and they were trying to do a great job, right? Like, but we came to things like with a different mindset. And so it's like asking the question, like, okay, yes, we can absolutely talk about visibility. Could you help me understand what you want to accomplish with that, right? If they're like, we want everyone to see everything, they're a tech company. Great. We can show you how to do that, because we also at Tableau had the ability to lock that down and permissioning. So only certain people could see it. But after we said, oh, absolutely, everyone can see it, there's no way they wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Right. So just that second question, that just digging a bit deeper rather than being that's a translator, right? Yeah. A technician is like, absolutely, I can show you that. Boop, boop, boop.
Right.
That's a completely different conversation.
Well, and it's seeking to understand context, right? Yeah. And because to your point, the answer is actually both yes and no, depending on the situation, right? And so it's having sort of that emotional intelligence and presence of mind, right? Situational awareness to be able to determine that. By the way, Krysten, I just feel like we should say hello to a few folks. Nearmap happens to be one of my clients, so I think it's Jorge. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Nice to see you. By the way, Mark Gunzik, I hope I'm saying that right, loves your translator analogy, and Sherry Maza. There's Sherry. Sherry is on. She's been on the show. She's another author, by the way. And Evan, thanks for chiming in. Really good process. This is a great question, by the way, from Evan. So lots of companies blurring the lines of accountability across the sales process. Each role benefits from being able to learn or lean into either skill set. But for effectiveness, what is in scope and out of scope for areas of overlap, business value discovery, proposal creation, et cetera? Yeah. Evan, thank you much for the question. Krysten, do you care to take a stab at the question?
Sure. Yeah, because we do have to define swim lanes, right? Like, because that way it's efficient. But I mean, if I would say like the question about like proposal creation, I mean, the AE or AM is the seller.
I agree with that.
Going to create the proposal as far as like who scopes what is actually what we should be selling, right? Like how we right size that deployment, how we correctly onboard. That may need to be a combination of two, depending 100%. On how complex the solution is, right? And we may not just need a solution engineer, we may need an architect, right? Like depending on how many systems we're connecting. Like, so it's a complicated question to answer as far as like who should do what, but not as far as proposal. But I do like the question about discovery, because both both parties should be doing business value discovery. And in fact, like the technical sellers can be the absolute best at business value discovery, because when people are introduced as this is the solution engineer, solution architect, people's guards come down because that typically those folks don't typically have a sales title, and they view them at people view technical sellers as more like agnostic, right? Like you're here about like, and so there is more trust there. So I frequently with questions like deeper discovery, where I felt like if I ask it guard maybe up, I would be like, here's what we really want to know. And then we would prep in pre-call, right? About like, here's the question we should be asking so that we know how to come at this. But the technical seller is often the best person to be able to ask those questions.
Yeah. Well, and you said the operative thing there, which is prepping and preparing your SE for the conversation, which leads right into some of the do's for the account executive, because the reality is I believe that sales engineers are only as good as the account executives, if I can use the term, and allow them or enable them to be, and that they own part of the responsibility of, quote, positioning the SEs for success. So do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, 100%. Nobody likes to be thrown into a situation where they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know what they've just walked into, right? One of my old bosses used to say, like, kindergartners like surprises, like everybody else doesn't, right? Like nobody likes to be surprised by that. And many times technical sellers, they want to be able to think deeply about something. They don't want to necessarily be thrown in where, like, nobody likes that, but certain personalities especially don't. So I always wanted to be like, sales is to me about two things, primarily, like friction reduction, making it easy, and what's in it for me, like making it personal. And with enterprise, that is true of external people, like who we're selling to, but it's even more true, I think, of internal teams.
Without a doubt.
Friction reduction, make it easy and make it personal. Like what's in it for them. So I would say, like we'll talk about, I can go more in depth about prep. AEs should absolutely be prepping technical sellers. I've heard horror stories about people just getting thrown on calls with no time. I mean, you can do that, but it's not optimizing anyone's time. Yeah. And it's, as an AE, that's not going to go well for you. Yeah. One of the things that I did, and it was actually one of my first bosses taught me this, was putting a second, like once the call is booked, putting a second invite on the calendar that just says internal. And then on that invite, we would list 7 things, like who's on the call, like what's their name and what's their role, what is their LinkedIn profile, if that's relevant, what is their company info? Is it a 100,000 person company? Is it a 1,000 person company? Is it a 14-year-old company? Is it a 4-year-old company? Because those two companies make decisions very differently and are different maturity levels. Like what's the org's priority? What is the goal of the call? What are we trying to do? Right? What is the role that everybody should play on this call? Right? Yeah. But in some cases, I would be like, technical seller is doing most of the discovery as we go along. My role is I'm facilitating.
Amen.
I'm sitting back and watching body language, whether internal or on Zoom. I'm pulling people into the conversation as needed. I'm watching who's not paying, like that sort of thing. And then an ideal outcome. And this is so important, because if we get to next steps and we're in the last 10 minutes of the call and the tech seller is, well, like next step, we should probably do a 2-hour custom demo. And the AE is like, there's another group I need to multi-thread into. Like we have to do the demo with them first, or we have to talk to executives next. Right. Like if the AE or the seller doesn't communicate that, that's on us for not saying, what are we even trying to do? So like so like that has to, so at minimum, that should be, I feel like a great place for that is on the calendar. I know there are people that have set up like CRM workflows where to request an SE, you have to put in all that stuff. But I always wanted to put in like all the stuff I wish I, if I'm on the other side, what do I want to know?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then I also think AEs should be intentional about incentivizing SEs to want to work with them. And we can do that in a number of ways, right? We can be a delight to work with, making sure that we're prepped, right? That the other person feels prepped. I also wanted to know when I would first meet with SEs, like, how do you like to be recognized? Like Chris, I know you're going to do a great job. Do you prefer, like, sometimes I will put a shout out in the XYZ Slack channel. Would you prefer that? Some people don't like that. Some people would rather I just send a detailed note to their manager about like they did an excellent job about this. Some people prefer that. Some people really like don't want to necessarily call attention to that for whatever reason. Maybe they just like have a particular like place that they like to go eat, and they would prefer just send, if you think I did a great job, like send me a gift card at the end of the deal, right? Yeah. Whatever. Like, how do you like to be recognized? Because I can also like sometimes we assume people want to be treated the way we want to be treated.
Right.
That's not true.
Right. 100%. I mean, again, you've said so many things. First of all, I love this idea of sales is all about friction reduction and what's in it for me. And that not only does that equate to the relationship and the conversation with our prospects and customers, but internally with our colleagues. And you used one of my favorite words, intentional. Mm-hmm. We should be intentional with how we go about our job. And some of the things that you were saying, the 7 points that you put in, they seem so obvious and so straightforward. Yet we know that too many people are out there, and that's why you have a job and a business coaching AEs, because for whatever reason, even though things are probably common sense, they're not always common practice. So I love you. I love the fact that you're bringing that to the surface. By the way, Joe DiMuzio, I hope I'm saying that right, Joe, mentioned something about prepping with the SE. There's another thing that Cliff mentioned that I just wanted to bring to the surface, because I think this is interesting too, that he used to have the title as systems engineer on his business card because he didn't want to come across too salesy. And now he's proud to call himself a sales engineer. Well said, Cliff. There was another thing that you mentioned, and this really struck a chord too. I played basketball when I was in high school, and my coach always used to say, don't pass your teammate into trouble. Meaning, if he's guarded by two people already, don't give him the ball so he can just, and that's really what you're talking about is if you're an AE, don't put your SE in a position where you're setting them up for failure, because it makes all of us look bad, and it frustrates our prospects and customers.
Correct.
So absolutely love that. I promised you that we were going to keep this brief. I know you've got a packed schedule, so we're only going to go a few more minutes here. We've talked about some of the do's and don'ts on both sides. I'm going to ask you a question that I have a feeling is going to trigger a little bit of a response, and I'm going to invite you to be as brutally honest as you can possibly be. Is there one pet peeve in particular, or something in particular that you've maybe seen sales engineers do before that really drives you a little bit crazy, that those of us who are sales engineers should be on the on the lookout for or be aware of?
I would say first of all, number one is like not caring to learn how to approach these calls like in a productive way. If you don't even want to call it like learning to be a seller, like I guarantee you as a technical seller, you spend a lot of time on the product. How much time have you spent learning how to have that conversation. And it's totally understandable that companies many times do not train us for that. Many times the company is going to get you knee deep in product, but your job, you're not an engineer. Like, you are not building the product. Your job is to have conversations about the product. And so we should be spending an equal amount of, or like, we need to be intentional about learning how to have that conversation. And that is like great discovery. You can listen, you can read and listen to things about discovery. One of my favorite things is to read and listen to things about reporters, because reporters get people to talk to them, and they frequently get people to say things that they had no intention of saying. Right. So if we think of, even if we just think of ourselves as like reporters, like that, and like we're interviewing, it doesn't even have to be
journalists.
Yeah. Right. Because you should be uncovering something. We should be getting to the bottom of something, right? We're investigative reporters or doctors, right? So to the point about asking second level questions, if I go to the doctor and I'm like, you know what, like I have some chest pain and I'd like for you to, like, what do I do about that? I'm not a doctor, but my dad is. And I can tell you, there's a lot of different answers to that question, right? We don't just immediately be like, well, they shouldn't just immediately be
take this pill.
Take this pill, or let's schedule you for open heart surgery, right? Like, that could be heartburn. It could be you need to take some Tums. And so like, that's one of my favorite analogies, is like good salespeople are doctors. Like, we ask the questions to narrow down so that we know how to help. And so like technical sellers, like when they don't even care to learn how to do that, that is hard. And honestly, the best and most respected and the technical sellers, and the ones who made the most money, I can tell you, at Tableau, at Salesforce, are the ones who understand the business problems that they are solving, because they have intentionally learned that. And those folks would just blow me away, like with their business knowledge, like their business acumen. Right. Because the more, like we talked about, because that lends the context and the nuance to the conversation. And the more we think of ourselves as translators, the more context and the more nuance we understand, the better translator like we are going to be. And so like, I think we have to learn, we have to be intentional about learning those things. The other kind of simple thing is, I think, and this is true of sellers and technical sellers, is sometimes we assume that everyone's vocabulary means the same thing.
Amen.
And sometimes we think like the most basic questions are like, absolutely, I'm happy to answer what you just asked. I just want to level set on vocabulary. When you say XYZ, I think what you mean is this A, B, and C. If that's right, we can go from there. But I have been floored at the amount of time just starting with vocabulary leads us down a completely different conversation. And when we just, they're like, oh, well, they said data pipeline, they mean this. Like, woo, that's a loaded question.
Let's take a step back. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love that. It's in fact, I think it's one of the sub chapters or the subsections of my book. Don't assume they know your terminology, and don't assume that you know theirs, right? And you're right. I've literally seen conversations run 30 minutes or more on an assumption that we're using the same or a term in the same way, and then we get to 30 minutes like, oh, wait a minute, that's what you mean? In fact, there was one client that I was working with a few years ago, and they had a term called audit trail. I had a very specific idea in my mind of what they were talking about, and I found out it was completely and totally different in their particular context. So that's a great example. By the way, I want to double click. You've used the term translator a couple times. I want to double click for anybody who may have missed your definition. You said translators help people understand one another. That is such a great way to think about this role. Okay, I have one final thought, and then I'll turn that into a question. And then, Krysten, I want to let you go because I know you've got a crazy busy schedule. So Amadeo, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Thanks for tuning in. He mentioned establishing roles and boundaries is so important so that we're competing. Yeah. And I think it was Evan who asked something about, like the swim lanes and sort of stuff. Yeah. One of the things that I am on record as saying countless times is that I do think putting a process in place is important. But I think if trust is low between AE and SE, the process almost doesn't matter because we're never going to be able to follow and there are times, look, SEs and SEs have heard me say this before. I know in the ideal world, you'd get the opportunity to do some discovery before a meeting or a demo. That's not always going to happen. Right. And like, there are just times when we need to take one for the team. Mm-hmm. When trust is high, we can break the process in the interest of doing what's in the best interest of the client and what's in the best interest of revenue. My question for you, last question, is there one thing in particular that AEs and SEs can do to increase trust?
You can tell me if I'm wrong about this. I think one of the first things that AEs can do to start building that trust is to do that prep work and provide that prep work every time without somebody having to ask for it. You should not have to chase me to send 500 Slacks to get me to tell you what is the call that we're doing tomorrow.
Right.
And if we're meeting, if it's a 6, 7, 8 figure deal, we should be having a call or multiple calls about how that's going to go
100%.
Ahead of time. Not just I'm not just sending you 5 sentences of context and be like, well, let's hope we have a great call like that. I think that goes, the prep goes a long way. So I think that's one of the first things that on the AE side that we can do. And I think both, I can't remember. I think it was the first company I was with, but then the managers talked about the power of assuming positive intent, assuming that the other person is trying to do the right thing and operating from there, having conversations about hey, I wasn't, that call ended differently than I thought it was going to. Can you help me understand where you just assuming positive intent versus why did you do that? I think that's just in general, conversation going to go well. And I think just keeping open and honest communication on both sides so that we don't resentment doesn't, pile up on both sides.
Well, and it's like you said earlier, removing friction and remembering what's in it for me. Right. And the way I speak about what you just referred to is let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't go precisely the way we thought it was going to go, rather than assume or jump to a conclusion, they don't care about me, they don't care about my time, they're just trying to do that. Let's give each other the benefit of the doubt and see how that changes things. Krysten, I want to be respectful of your time, so we're going to wrap things up, folks. This is a little bit shorter of a session than I do sometimes. Krysten, I hope you'll come back and visit me again and have another conversation. Might you be open to that idea?
Yeah, definitely open. I think technical sellers, solution consultants are some of the most critical people. They're some of my favorite people to work with in a company because they make or break so many things. Are so crucial. I've been so fortunate to work with amazing technical sellers. So happy to.
Yeah. And in reverse, I'll just suggest that I think for most sales engineers, working with account executives that recognize their value and want to collaborate, want to partner and view it as a partnership, there's nothing that we won't do for account executives that take that approach. So Sean McMahon chimed in there at the very end. Sean, rehearsed prior to game day. Love that. Krysten, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. For those of you who tuned in, thank you so much for sitting in. If you're catching the recording I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Krysten, fair to say that anybody listening to this can reach out to you on LinkedIn and make a connection?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous. Folks, that's it for today. Krysten, thank you so much for being here. We'll see you on next week's Tech Sales Advice. Thanks all.
Chris.
Bye.